Okay, let's talk about commercial insights. What really qualifies as insight? This is a question we get all the time. And when you look at all the information surrounding commercial teaching or commercial coaching, it becomes really difficult to identify what makes for world class insight. You can go to the dictionary and try to look up the definition of insight, and that's helpful. But maybe we try to explain what commercial insight is by explaining what it is not. Let's separate insight from some other types of information that are conveyed through sales messages today. For example, starting on the outside of the diagram that you see here is general information. Now, this is the universe of information that we have and covers just about everything. We don't process all of it because most of it isn't relevant right now. We just know it exists within our reach and often spend some time filtering out what might be relevant. When you're trying to arrive at an insight, the first hurdle is to be credible and actionable for it to capture the customer's attention. The sales message must demonstrate an understanding of the customer's world, and it must be supported by real-world evidence. Without it, a customer is likely to ignore or reject what you're saying. If the information is both credible and relevant, then it lands in the next tier of accepted information. Okay, but the problem with accepted information is that it sounds like everybody else's information. Accepted information would be something like, there were many hacks last year, including Anthem, Primera, the Office of Personnel Management. It doesn't really teach the customer anything new. It just confirms something that the customer already knows. So the next hurdle to arriving at an insight, apart from being credible and relevant, is to actually be newsworthy. Without it, the customer is not going to do anything with the information. At least nothing that they weren't already doing, right? So messages that are both credible and relevant and newsworthy fall in the category of thought leadership. And this is by far the most infamous because most companies are actively striving to be thought leaders in their industry, mistaking thought leadership with insight. And for good reason, right? Information in this category actually teaches us something they wouldn't have found out on their own, except it doesn't really drive action, okay? Customers learn something new, but they may not really act on that information. The third hurdle of getting from accepted information to insight is really that it has to be frame breaking. It needs to disrupt the customer's status quo. It needs to convey a new idea. At the same time, it needs to juxtapose the cost of the current behavior to the potential for alternate action. So there should be both an emotional and a rational response from the customer. Overcoming this hurdle brings us closer to insight, information that is frame breaking, that clearly places the new idea over the current behavior and forces the customer to take action. But without the insight leading the customer exclusively to you, to Fortinet, it is just free consulting, right? The customer is free to take the idea out to bid, opening up the opportunity to competitors like Palo Alto or Cisco or Checkpoint to win the business. So the final hurdle at arriving at an insight is for us to lead back to our unique capabilities at Fortinet that only we can offer to customers. So think about what it is that Fortinet brings to the marketplace that nobody else can. Only when an insight leads back to us is it called a commercial insight, as it makes us the only supplier that can help the customer take action on that insight better than anybody else, better than Palo Alto, better than Checkpoint, better than Cisco, better than Juniper. So looking at your own sales messages, the question is, are you finding yourself taking commercial insights to the marketplace? Or when you start conversations with customers, are you using just accepted information, general information, or trying to share thought leadership even? Are you guilty of disguising other types of information as insight? I want to talk to you about reframing. What is cognitive reframing or cognitive restructuring? Listen, a psychologist named Aaron T. Beck developed something called cognitive therapy in the 1960s. Beck was actually working with patients that had been diagnosed with depression and found that negative thoughts would come into the minds of these patients. Beck was helping his patients recognize the impact of their negative thoughts and aided them in shifting their mindset to think more positively, eventually lessening or even getting rid of the patient's depression. And this process was called cognitive restructuring. Basically, the goal is to rethink negative thoughts and turn them into positive thoughts. Now, cognitive restructuring was used as a tool, obviously, in therapeutic settings, right? But it led other researchers to recognize that this process also happens outside the clinic. So they started to use the term cognitive reframing as a way to describe the more generalized process. And the process is really anything that can cause a conscious shift in a person's mental perspective. This process can be used in sales when you're trying to make your customers' viewpoints shift. You can shift their perspective from neutral, from the status quo, to your point of view. In today's era of selling, customers are engaging suppliers only after they've done significant due diligence to really determine their needs, identify a solution, and settle on a price that they're willing to pay for the solution. In this world of established demand, we're being relegated to a role of fulfillment, with price being the only thing we're able to compete on by the time a customer reaches out to us. Remember, we're now in a 5.4 world, in a consensus-driven, challenger sale world. So this is not the environment that our sales organization wants to operate in, right? But today's better informed customer forces this shift in buying behavior. This is a reality, okay? We've got to face this reality. So the research done by the Corporate Executive Board figured out that high-performing reps teach customers where they learn, delivering disruptive commercial insight that is able to reframe the way that clients think about their own business and the problems facing their business. Okay, in the process of figuring out how the best performing reps teach their customers into the beginning of the sales funnel, what the Corporate Executive Board did was that they identified the ways that reps use commercial teaching to reframe customer thinking. And this commercial teaching approach is based on how familiar the customers are with the problem at hand, whether or not they've already developed an understanding of the solution. And so the three types of reframes that emerged are, the first one is the underestimated problem. Now, reps use this type of reframe when customers are both familiar with the problem at hand and have developed at least some notion of what a potential solution could be. But to reframe a customer's thinking, we need to teach them that the problem they face is one of much greater magnitude than they had originally thought, and that it should be really thought about very differently. The problem really warrants a different approach, which then we're able to teach the customer about. This is especially true if a client comes to us and says, "We haven't been hacked yet. We don't have a problem yet." That's when we truly expand the scope of the problem and let them know that they've underestimated the scope of the problem, that they will be hacked. It's a question of when, not if. Okay, the second type of reframe is that of the unrecognized driver. For this type of reframe, the customer is familiar with the problem, right? They know about advanced threats, but they've accepted it as a cost of doing business, or they look at it as a problem that they just can't solve. They might not have looked at our solution end to end to figure out that ATP can really help them, for example. So as such, the customer may have no inclination towards doing deeper research into what the solution could be, and may not even be looking for the solution. In this situation, what we need to do as Fortinet reps is really teach the customer that the problem is driven by a different, unrealized root cause that they had not even thought about. So we need to reveal the opportunity to them for the problem to be better managed, a single pane of glass to manage their entire threat landscape, their entire security infrastructure. And this is something that we bring to the table that is unique compared to anybody in the marketplace. The third type of reframe is that of the unanticipated problem. Listen, there are still customers out there who are ignorant of certain areas, ill-informed about certain areas in security, such as, for example, advanced threat mitigation, protection, or detection. And so we can take the opportunity to really teach them that an unrecognized problem, like an advanced threat, is fast approaching and will have a really bad impact on their business if it's not addressed. If we're able to commercially teach our customers about this problem effectively and bring in ATP as the unique positioning, as the unique solution that nobody else can do to solve their problem, then we will definitely get a step ahead of our competitors. Okay, here you see the 6 steps of a world-class teaching pitch. And this is a very purposeful choreography. The first step is called the warmer, according to the Corporate Executive Board. And this is about building credibility by quote-unquote reading their mind and demonstrating empathy. Listen, a well-designed teaching pitch really starts off with your assessment of your customer's key challenges. Don't underestimate the value in being able to tell your customer that they're not alone when it comes to their most pressing challenges, right? So when you put it all together, it should sound something like, we worked with a number of companies similar to yours, and we found that these particular challenges, A, B, and C, come up again and again as by far the most troubling. Is that what you're seeing, or would you add something else to the list? Okay, the whole point, of course, is to build credibility. Essentially, what you're saying to your customer is, I understand your world, and I'm not here to waste your time asking you to teach me about your business. You're bringing value to them in the first conversation. So this is called the warmer, the first step. And the customer state should be intrigued, and their excitement level is neutral or negative on this particular state. The next step is called reframe. And we talked about reframing and the 3 types of reframing. But what we need to do is reframe an unrecognized problem, need, or assumption. Okay? What you want to do is introduce a new perspective that really connects their challenges to either a bigger problem or a bigger opportunity than they ever realized that they had. So the reframe is simply about the insight itself. It's just the headline. And like any good headline, your goal is to catch your customer a little bit off guard with an unexpected viewpoint, to surprise them, to make them curious, get them wanting to hear more. So if you're going to reframe, make sure you really reframe, okay? Don't be timid, because the entire approach rests on your ability to surprise your customer and make them curious for more information. This is a scenario where you challenge them a little bit about their existing status quo. The third step in a commercial teaching pitch is called rational drowning. Now here, we actually gradually intensify the problem, okay? Both in terms of degree of the problem, so a degree of advanced threats, for example, malware, the need for them to cut costs, etc. So in this time, what you're going to do is introduce the data, the graphs, the tables, and the charts, where you need to quantify for the customer the true but often hidden cost of the problem or size of the opportunity that they have completely overlooked. This is where you do an economic justification, or a scenario where you point out how much they could possibly lose. For example, Sony lost $300 billion of brand value after they were hacked, even though the cost of implementing the solution for the hack was only $27 million. Okay? So rational drowning is basically the numbers-driven rationale for why your customer should think differently about their business, but you're going to present it specifically in a way designed about their business. Okay? To make them squirm a little, to feel like they're drowning. Okay? Marketers refer to this as the FUD factor, right? We've all heard this: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But before you demonstrate how Fortinet can really economically solve their key customer challenge, we've got to convince the customer that the challenge is worth solving, that it's significantly bigger than they thought in the first place. The fourth step of the challenger teaching pitch is called emotional impact. And this is where the psychological features of the problem have to be drawn out. Emotional impact isn't about the numbers, it's about the narrative, it's about the story. You got to paint a picture of how other companies, just like the customers or the prospects, went down a similarly painful path. Okay, they were engaging in behavior that they will recognize immediately as typical of their own company. So you're going to point out other examples of companies that you worked with, other clients that you worked with, that had pain similar to what these customers or prospects are experiencing. And you're going to be able to help them by not going down that painful journey. The fifth step is called a value proposition, or a new way. This is a new framework for addressing the problem, and it needs to be tied to our superior value proposition of Fortinet. So this is a point-by-point review of the specific capabilities that the client would really need in order to make good on whatever opportunity to either make money, save money, or mitigate risk that we've convinced them that they've been facing, right? So make sure that you don't start talking about the Fortinet solutions at this stage. You're still talking only at a higher level about the framework, possibly about security fabric, okay? But this step is still about the overall solution, not about Fortinet specifically. And finally, step 6 is our solution and implementation map. It's a map to demonstrate how our solution is better than anybody else's to equip the customer to act differently. How we're better than Palo Alto, how we're better than Cisco, how we're better than Checkpoint. And we really need to teach the customer something new and valuable about their business in a way that specifically leads them to value our capabilities over that of the competition. So here are the 6 steps of the commercial teaching pitch. Number 1, the warmer. Number 2, reframe. Number 3, rational drowning. Number 4, emotional impact. Number 5, value proposition. And only at step 6 do we get to our specific solution and implementation map.